Hey, welcome everybody to the Talent and Strategy Show here on the Success is a Choice Podcasting Network. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler. And with us, as always, is the co-host, Ruston Pierce. Ruston, how you doing this morning?
Good morning.
Well, good morning to you. And as always, this show is made possible by our friends over at Affinity Recruiting and Consulting. Check out all of their services. If you need some human resource outsourcing, if you need some new hires that fit your culture, whatever you need, they can probably do it for you. So check them out, affinitytoday.com. Well, our special guest today is Stephanie York. Stephanie is the Vice President and in-house counsel for Hennes Communication. She also hosts a show on PBS here in the Ohio area. So Stephanie York, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jamie and Ruston, for having me today. I appreciate it.
Well, you're in-house counsel. That automatically means that you're smarter than me. You are a lawyer. That means you're more educated than I am.
Yes, I am educated as an attorney, but I like to say I'm a recovering attorney.
What does that entail?
That entails I don't do much attorney work these days. I do review contracts and things like that, but I do crisis communications, using my skills in a different manner than actual, lawyer work.
Absolutely. Well, you do crisis communication. What is, I think of crisis, what is the difference of crisis communication, crisis prevention, crisis management, all that kind of stuff? I'm sure they're all in the same bucket, but they're all slightly different. So give us kind of a 30,000 foot view of the differences of all that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah. So crisis prevention, if you can prevent it at all, because it is a crisis, it's usually a sudden, event. But that's more of your operational plans in place. You can prevent hiring someone that has stolen from a company before if you ask the right questions and do the right background check. You can prevent, certain things from happening just by having the right technology in place and training and for your employees, things like that. So that's prevention. Management is what happens when there is a crisis. Are you prepared for it? Do you know what you're going to do? How are you going to handle it? Responding to it. But I got to tell you, there's another difference between crisis and issues. So crisis, like we like to say, is something that comes out of the blue. It hits you hard and quick, like getting T-boned in a car. For a company, it could be a chemical leak, an explosion, accusations of fiscal mismanagement, accusations of sexual misconduct, a cyber attack, electrocution, mass casualty event, trail derailment, as we saw in Ohio, active shooter, things like that are crisis. They happen quickly and with little warning. Issue management, which we do as well, is something you can anticipate. You can see it coming down the road. So if you're going to have layoffs, if there's a teacher or a union strike coming down the road, you're going to close a store or a facility. You're rerouting a highway, upending everybody's lives on how they're going to get to work, changing a dress code or social media policy, things of that nature. You see it coming, you can plan for it more. But both of those, crisis communications and issue management, they use the same skill set. It's different than the traditional practice of public relations, and I can explain that if you'd like, but, public relations, you're trying to bring more attention to your brand, right? You get people to like you more, so you can sell more widgets, you can sell more services, things like that. Let me tell you, when you're in the middle of a crisis, the last thing you want is more attention, right? So it's kind of counterintuitive, the methods we use when you handle a crisis or an issue.
So I think you said it a second ago. I didn't wake up this morning and go, I think I want to have a crisis today. So, when you talk about planning for crisis and when you talk about preparing for something that ends up being very reactive in nature, how do you do that? How do you work alongside organizations to plan for crisis?
Right. How can I plan for something I can't plan for because it just comes out of the blue, right? Well, we do crisis communications plans all the time. We do them from companies, big companies, universities, things like that. And I'm going to tell you exactly how we do it. And then you're your listeners can go back to their companies and they can draft one of these plans. We get the top people in a room, and it could be a small company that has just like the CEO and a communications person, or just 3 people. Sometimes we have 20 people in a room. It's like all the managers and things like that. And we go around the room and we ask everyone, what keeps you up at night? What keeps you up at night? Because what keeps the finance guy up at night is not what keeps the communications person up at night, or the facility manager up at night. They all are thinking of different things. And we write all these things down on the boards around us. And then we go through each one. It's called a threat assessment. If this were to happen, what would the hit be on your reputation? Right? If you were to have a fire, had to close down that, what would the hit be on your reputation? If, and how likely is this to occur? Right? And we rank them. A1, A2, B1, B2, B3, we rank them. Is it likely to occur, and will it have a big hit on your reputation? So, if you're in Northeast Ohio and there's a giant snowstorm and you have to close your organization for a couple days, that's likely to happen, but it's probably not going to be a big hit on your reputation because everybody's closed, right? So that would go way down on the list. But if you're like the YMCA and they have a drowning in their pool, that could happen. And that would be a big hit on their reputation. This did not happen that I know of. I'm just making this up.
Sure.
That would be a big hit on their reputation. So that would move up, right? And then we take like the top 15 scenarios and we say, if this were to happen, we write the plan. What's the first thing you're going to say about it? We draft the first press release. We have a column. Who are we going to call internally and externally to tell about this? Because if you have this happen, if you have this big fire and explosion, because you're a chemical company and you're planning for this, I'm going to call these people internally, and I'm going to call the mayor, I'm going to call the fire, all these people, and let them know externally. And we give them their phone numbers and their emails because, 3:00 in the morning is when you're going to have the crisis, and you're not going to want to be looking up their phone numbers. So they have a playbook, a true playbook in front of them of their 15, things that keep them up at night that would devastate them if it were to happen. And they have their first tweet, their first Facebook post, because, it's the 20th century, you got to have your social media in line. And they have their first press release. Now it might need tweaked at the moment, but they won't have to draft it from whole cloth. And most importantly, we make sure all the messaging and all the press releases are pre-vetted by everybody in the organization, including the organization's attorneys. Because if you have to get the attorney's approval in the middle of a crisis, you're going to be waiting hours, days. Back when I worked as an attorney, they called law the black hole. It's where things go to die, right?
That's right.
That's right. So there you got a playbook that if this happens, the person who's in charge of rolling this out has full authority. We have a cyber attack. You want to put something up there. And why is that important to get up there first and quick? Because if you're not up there telling people and people start hearing rumors, they start filling in the information, whether it's true or not. And then you really got a problem on your hands.
So we hear crisis. We see it on TV all the time, whether it's on the news or sports or entertainment. It doesn't matter. In our own lives, we see crisis a lot. What are 1 or 2 examples that you've seen of maybe people that have done it wrong, or not even, maybe we've seen people do it wrong, but what are some ways, what are some things that people should have done or companies should have done in a couple crises that maybe pop into your mind that are top of mind for you?
Sure. I'm going to tell you about a famous case that they did something right that most people know about. I don't know, you may be too young to remember this, but I even remember it. And so you may, I'm not sure. I don't know if you know, back in the 80s, now I was only like 10. Back in the 80s, Tylenol had a crisis, a big crisis. I see Ruston shaking his head. Cyanide. Somebody was putting cyanide in Tylenol capsules. And kids were taking taking Tylenol, adults were just taking it for a headache and dying. I mean, it was a true crisis. But what did Tylenol do? They didn't say, hey, this isn't our problem. Somebody is doing something criminal and slipping it in. They didn't say that. What they did, they came out and said, clear the shelves. They completely cleared the shelves of every single Tylenol product. And they didn't come back for months. I mean, like almost a year. They came back and they reformulated. That's when we started getting gel caps. That's when we got the bottles that have the foil on top and the tamper-proof bottles that nobody can get into these days at all, even when you want to get into them. But I got to tell you, there's nobody that I know of who would hesitate giving their kids a Tylenol product today, even though they had people dying from it back then. I mean, that was a true master class in how to handle a crisis. I can't think of a better example. Some poor examples, I mean, just, and I don't want to disparage too many people, but everybody remembers the and I don't remember the specifics, but the airline where the guy was pulled off he was arguing with a steward, a flight attendant, and was dragged off the plane. It was a physician, I think. He was, it was really bad. And like, they didn't come out and say anything about that. And when they did, they apologized for having to, what did they say? Something about, we apologize for having to reschedule, everybody's flights. Like, it was just like it was not good. I mean, I don't even know how to say it. It wasn't empathetic. It wasn't.
They completely avoided the issue.
And they missed the point. Everybody was just outraged by what happened. And they were just, felt bad because they had to, we're sorry we had to reaccommodate, I think is what they said. And it's like, you're sorry you had to reaccommodate. What about this poor guy you dragged off for, really, there was no reason. And it was just a horrible situation. So there are textbook ways to handle crisis. There are things you should do. And it's very counterintuitive to what you want to do. And so we're dealing with CEOs all the time that, this crisis happens and they're like, oh my God, maybe it'll just blow over. If we don't say anything, nobody will, or it'll be loud for a minute and then die down. I'm sorry. If you have a crisis, you need to over communicate. In fact, I don't think you can over communicate, to be honest. Your stakeholders want to hear from you. Your employees want to hear from you. I mean, they want to know that there's a situation, you're working to fix it, and they'll be updated along the way. You need to communicate regularly. Like if you have an ongoing crisis, COVID, back when I was the assistant law director, I was the city spokesperson for Mayor Plaswellick. About 8 years ago, we had Ebola in the city of Akron. I don't know if you remember that, Jamie. There was a case of Ebola. I mean, that was a big thing. You need to communicate regularly. You need to have regular scheduled updates. We had them every couple hours for the first 2 days of that crisis. Then we went to every half day. Then we went to every day. And then, we started spreading it out as it got farther and farther, away. Governor DeWine did it with COVID. He had daily updates at the beginning. And then he had Tuesdays at 2. He had his big update on COVID. And I think the women around Ohio got together and called it, Wine with DeWine at 2:00, and they'd have their glass of wine and listen to the COVID update. Or maybe that was just me, but, but people showed up for those updates. They listened. The media came to those. That's where they got their information. So they were getting it directly from the governor. The governor was controlling the message because everybody waited for him to talk. You need to tell what you know when you know it and tell what you don't know. I mean, it's really a time to embrace that buzzword transparency, admit to not having all the answers perhaps, and promise to share more when you can. People aren't afraid if you say, listen, I don't know the cause or I don't know what happened. They just want to know that you're aware of it and that you're looking into it. It's when they think you're covering it up, or you're lying about it, that scare people and freak them out, to be honest.
So when exactly is the last time we've seen anybody do that? it seems like everybody's so scared to admit that they don't know something, and you mentioned
Oh, absolutely.
train derailments. You mentioned, it doesn't matter what it is. It seems like every time you turn on the news, somebody is maybe holding back, that transparency thing that you said. It's in a short supply nowadays, it feels like.
I'll tell you, we have we call it the damage control playbook. It has 5 simple steps, and we use it all the time. Tell the truth, tell it all, tell it first, tell it fast, and tell it to the people who matter most, your stakeholders. There's also, a big pitfall in this transparency thing. You need to communicate forthrightly. You need to provide reassurances during a crisis, but you have to avoid the pitfalls of over reassuring. And I think that's where the train derailment and things kind of go off track. If I could put a little off color humor in there, I guess. It's the single most common crisis communication mistake. If leadership is sharing good news, they can't be overly optimistic. You got to temper good news with a little dose of reality. Like, we're continuing to do the best we can and make plans, and we'll share these plans with you, but understand that conditions are changing, almost daily, and we may have to change those plans. And when we do, we'll let you know. By doing all of that, by engaging in, an extraordinary level of transparency, even when you don't have all the answers, you build trust with your stakeholders, and having that trust is probably one of the most important things you'll come out of that crisis when it ends.
So we have a lot of different people that listen in a lot of different industries. And I think what you just said is really valuable. And I want to try to narrow that down even more so people have a little nugget to take away. When you're in crisis, over communication is vital. If you were going to name 3 or 4 pros or 3 or 4 positive consequences of over communicating, just to reiterate to people, this is why you over communicate. What do you think the 3 or 4 things that positive outcomes that happen from over communicating?
So we say, tell the truth, tell it all, tell it first. The tell it all. If you're not telling it all, someone else is telling their version of all,
Sure,
which may or may not be true. And then you're stuck with just reacting to change, trying to combat false narratives. So it's so important. And we think internal stakeholders are even more valuable than your external stakeholders. For example, you got to let your employees know what's going on first. If you don't let your employees know what's going on, first of all, the rumor mill's going, right? That's where the rumors start. But those people, everyone knows where they work, their family, their friends. They're going to be like, I heard this. And they're not going to be able to say, no, that's not true, unless you're telling them the truth. If you tell them first what happened, they're correcting misinformation for you. They're your biggest advocates out there.
sure.
So I tell you, tell your internal stakeholders, your biggest donors if you're a nonprofit, your clients, your patients if you're a hospital, your customers, the people that you care about most, tell them first before you tell the media. Now, we think telling the media is very important, but you don't want your stakeholders to read about it. Your most important ones to read about in the paper. Like someone got fired because they were mismanaging money. Do you think you want to read that your CFO was fired because they stole money in the paper when you work for that company? You'd be like, what the heck? Why wouldn't they tell us this? And then then your internal people don't trust you. So it really does build trust. It gets, you get a whole bunch of people telling your story then, if you get out first. I think those are really big nuggets of why you get out first.
I saw a group once that didn't do that, and the absolute worst PR they could ever have. One of their employees got stopped in the parking lot by a camera crew and asked how they felt about this thing that happened, and the person was like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
And so not only was he embarrassed, upset that he didn't know about it,
Right.
but he probably was pretty mad, that
Yeah.
he was put in that
All of
position.
that. Yeah. All of that conveyed on camera. Like it was clear
Yeah.
that he was in the dark, had no idea what they were talking about, looked like an idiot standing there going, I don't know how to respond to that. The whole thing was just really bad.
I feel really bad. I'll tell you, because when we come in on a situation like that, we not only coach them, this is what you need to tell your employees. We give them talking points to talk to their employees, or an email to their employees, something to tell so the employees know. But we give them high level talking points that their employees can have, so that if they're approached in the parking lot or in the grocery store or anywhere, they can also answer, and everybody's singing from the same hymnal. They're all saying the same thing. I mean, it just
Yep.
makes sense. But people think, well, if I don't tell them, maybe they'll never find out. First of all, the truth always comes out. It might not come out today, it might not come out tomorrow, it may not come out for 3 years, when that lawsuit's over, but it's going to come out. And if they find out you've lied or covered it up, then you're in, the covers up is always worse than the actual act. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah. So I hope that was helpful.
Absolutely.
Why don't we tend to learn that? You just said the cover up is always worse than the actual act, but yet it seems like we're continually doing the same thing over and over again, and people are covering stuff up or trying to fool people when they know it won't work. What is
So
why?
we call the 3 F's. And I won't say the first F because, my watch doesn't like that F. We won't say the first F because it is being recorded and stuff, but I'll paraphrase. If you F up, fess up, and fix up. In other words, admit what happened and pivot immediately over to what you're going to say so it does, or do, so it doesn't happen again. Right? Admit what happened. People will forgive you. People make mistakes. We hire people that do bad things. We can't control that. We have products that explode on us. I mean, there's bad things happen to good companies, right? But if you just say what happened and then say what things you're putting into place so it doesn't happen again, you get a lot of goodwill and forgiveness. I mean, people, it really is hard, and that is probably one of the biggest things we have when we come into sudden crisis situations is convincing the CEO and their attorneys to if you messed up, listen, if you're a hospital and you cut off the wrong arm, and you don't apologize, I mean, you're gonna pay whether you apologize or not. They find that doctors that come out and apologize, and tell them what happened. People just want the truth. What happened? If you're not telling them anything, if you stonewall them and you cut off the wrong arm, something happens, and they're like, do not talk to that family. That's when the family goes, I want to know what happened. Get my attorney.
Yeah.
When they start getting the attorneys, you're going to pay one way or the other, but they find that the payment's way less if you come out and admit what happened, apologize, and you got to mean it. I mean, you should be sorry if you did something like that, and tell them what you're putting into place so it doesn't happen again. What other protocols are going into place so you're not lopping off somebody else's arm.
So I'm curious, when you go in to work with someone on crisis management, and this may be a loaded question for an attorney, but when you walk in and you're, just learning what's happened, it's all fresh, you're trying to do discovery and figure out what you're dealing with. Do you worry more about the court of public opinion, or do you worry more about the court of legal in that moment? Or is there like a sequencing where you're like, okay, we've got to address court of public opinion first, then we'll get to legal? Or is it all happening in correspondence? What's that process look like?
Great question. And I am the perfect person to ask because I am an attorney who does crisis communications, right? We have attorneys come to us all the time. Listen, the legal process is slow.
Mm-hmm.
It is completely slow. The court of public opinion is like, nowadays with social media, you have 17 seconds or 12 seconds that something's up to respond. I mean, things are coming out all the time. And I got to tell you, we think the court of public opinion is more important. Because let me ask you this, if you win that case 3 years down the road, but nobody's coming to your restaurant because you've been bashed, you did something at that restaurant that was bad, but this lawsuit's going on. Who cares if you won if no one's buying your product? If
Sure.
nobody's coming to your store, if you've had to shutter the doors, nobody cares that you won, that you were right at the, oh, good, you were right at the end. Congratulations. You don't have a business anymore. So the court of public opinion is, we think, most important. But I have to tell you, the caveat is we get calls all the time from attorneys. I'd say, well, I don't want to, I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say over half is by attorneys calling us for their help because their clients are going through crisis. They are handling the case in the legal process or leading up to, it could be a potential legal process, but they don't want to, or they don't have the same training as we do to handle the court of public opinion. So they don't want to write the letters to the employees, to the customers, to the, and the talking points for the board members and things like that. But we tell all of our clients, listen, you run this by legal. Typically they're on the phone with us. You run it by legal, you show it to them because we don't want to say anything that'll hurt your case down the road. But the problem is lawyers want to say no comment, right? No comment. It's a matter under litigation.
Mm-hmm.
That you can't say. If you say no comment, you might as well just have guilty tattooed on your forehead.
Yep.
Because people are thinking guilty, 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 right? They are. So there's always something you can say. You can say, I can't talk about a specific case of sexual harassment. But what I can tell you is when we get an allegation like that, here's the steps we take to investigate. And here's where we are in the process now.
Right.
You're not talking about anybody in specifically, but you're giving a nice soundbite. You're giving information, something the reporters can write about, but it's not no comment. Always something you can say.
And you're also sending the message that you're on top of it.
Absolutely.
when you say no comment, people immediately go to either number one, they have absolutely no idea what happened, or number two, they're covering something up.
Absolutely. And if you're covering up, you're guilty.
Mm-hmm.
What did they do? Yep.
Yeah. Instead of saying no comment, you probably shouldn't say, well, we have a process, but if I were Ruston, I would probably make sure I have a really good attorney right now. Probably wouldn't want to throw someone under the bus.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not. We've talked a little bit about crisis, but you mentioned at the start, issues, issues are maybe something that can be foreseen.
Yes.
To a degree. Are there some common issues that come to you and some common ways that our people, either make mistakes in those issues or they're more prepared for when those issues come up?
Well, I mean, the issues we see, and I don't know if you can predict that every company will have these, but like if you're going to have layoffs, they know they're going to have this down the road because they're looking at their finances and like, listen, this is not going to sustain. In June, we're going to have to do layoffs. Listen, the sooner you let people know that so they can prepare, the better. The more, if you can do a Q&A, is this going to affect me? How's it going to affect me? Will I get, some sort of walk away money? Well, I forget what they call it. Sometimes I get a
severance.
Am I going to get a severance? You can prepare this. And we do for issues when we get called in for issues, we do what is called a strategy document. And the strategy document will have, the scenario will have high level talking points in there around the scenario. We'll have who the stakeholders are that you're going to have to communicate to and the tools you'll need to communicate to them, whether it'll be an email, a press release, talking points, a video. Perhaps we'll say, maybe you'll want to do a video on this. We do that a lot with superintendents that want to put out messages to their students or their teachers. They like to do video messages these days. So we'll have them do little videos. So we can plan that whole document, and then we can do even a timeline. On this date, the video is going to go out. On the next day, you're going to do this. The next day, you're going to let this person, this group know, so that it's done in a manner, in a way that you can control, that the internal audiences are learning about this before the external audiences, like the media, things like that. the kind of crisis, like I said, there's strikes. We get called for strikes all the time leading up to a strike, whether it's a school strike or a union, bus drivers, things like that. Uh, and we, plan for that along the way. There's touch points, a 10-day strike notice will come out. So you need a whole communication around the 10-day strike notice. You need a press release for that. You need an email to your employees for that. You need an email to parents for that. Then they actually have all those negotiations. Well, after each negotiation, the union puts out a statement. We couldn't come to terms and they're being unreasonable. And so we can anticipate that, and we can pretty much write a lot of those things ahead of time because we know the facts. So there are ways to prepare for that and know what's coming. And there are some things that are true crisis that you can prepare for. I mean, a cyber attack. Listen, it's not whether you're going to get hit with a cyber attack, it's when you're going to get hit with a cyber attack. I mean,
Sure.
It's going to happen. It happens in every industry. Somebody is going to click on a link they shouldn't click on because they're getting more and more sophisticated. No longer are there typos in the emails. They look exactly like your bank. It's they're getting really sophisticated, and someone's going to click on a link and you're going to get, attacked, and you can prepare for that. You should prepare for that. You should have your everything ready to go. Because if you wait and you're putting that messaging together that day and everybody's computer's frozen, they're panicking that minute. They're going on their phones and putting on social media. I can't get into my computer. We have that evil guy on our screen telling us to give us money. Making people panic. You got to be out there saying something.
Yep. There's a somewhat new concept out there called outrage management. For our listeners, kind of unpack what is outrage management and what do you all do to advise for that?
Yeah. So outrage management is, I don't want to say somewhat new, but it's okay. So the pandemic put a spotlight on this specialized practice of outrage management, to be honest, and how to make it work in a culture dominated by social media. Where every slight or disagreement turns into this battle royale, just unfolding right on social media. And there's a lot of outrage to go around out there. We saw it first when the pandemic hit. Our school clients were calling us because they were beside themselves, because when it came to running schools in the middle of a pandemic, the outrage came no matter what they decided. If they decided to go online, parents were outraged. If they decided to have, to stay in school, parents were outraged. If they decided to mask, parents were outraged. I mean, it didn't matter what they decided. It was really, it was terrible. So managing outrage, it's important during any crisis, and it can hit any industry. But there are some steps you can take. One of the things we say is when you have somebody outraged, you need to validate their legitimate concerns. And what do I mean by that? Listen, you can't debate someone out of being outraged. I mean, you just can't, especially if you're dealing with someone who's really hostile or upset. Attempting to rebut their concerns are just going to backfire. They're not going to listen, right? So we look for ways to validate their legitimate concerns and then respond in a very measured way. Like, I understand why you might not want to get a vaccination right away. It came out super quick and it's relatively untested, but now we see that it's really effective. So validate where you can validate and then respond in a measured way. You need to give credit. So if you've decided to change something or improve something because it was pointed out to you, because you screwed up and someone said, hey, or, especially if that pressure was applied by, your employees or an activist or the critic, or maybe even the reporter, put the change in context, have the grace and honesty to say you responded because it was pointed out. We have a guy, his name is Peter Sandman. He's a colleague of and a friend of Hennes. And he always says, attributing your good behavior to your own natural goodness triggers skepticism. So don't give yourself the credit for making that change. If it was pointed out to you by those activists, you were, and you changed it, tell them, they're more likely to believe that you actually did it because you listened to them. Sharing control. The higher the outrage, the less willing people are to keep the control in your hands. I mean, you screwed it up. Why should we count on you to fix it? Right? So let others certify and validate that you've worked to fix the problem. Bring in outside experts. That's when you bring in the outside audit to look over your books. I mean, what better way to show you changed it than to have an impartial person come in and say, hey, yes, these are best practices in place now. So yeah, those are some tips to handling outrage. It's a difficult out there these days on social media. It's really taken over our world. And most of our crises are unfolding first on social media too.
It's interesting that you mentioned your school partners. So Stephanie and I haven't discussed this. She didn't know this about me, but I was running a school when the pandemic hit.
Oh,
and I was fortunate. Yeah. Well, I was fortunate because we had developed an online program previously that we used all the time to eliminate snow days.
Wow.
So all of our middle and high school teachers, we were a K-12 school. All of our middle and high school teachers were very versed in how to use our online program. And so when the pandemic hit, we were actually on spring break.
Oh,
so we literally sent an email to our families and said, hey, middle and high school is going to start school on Monday online.
Yep.
Elementary gets an extra week of spring break. We will send you all things you can do at home if you would like, but the following Monday we need that week to train our elementary teachers how to use our online program, and the following Monday they'll be on as well. So we were actually, and I don't say this arrogantly, but we were actually one of the few schools in the country that did not actually miss a day.
That's amazing. Although our school system didn't, because they didn't go, I mean, Revere stayed in class pretty much the whole time, much to a lot of parents' dismay. I mean, they had an online option, but it just depends where you were. But that is great, because nowadays, because that system's in place, if there does need to go on, people need to go online, they can now pivot to online pretty quickly, especially when there's going to be a strike. I found it very interesting because the threat of a strike, even though it is really bad, it doesn't mean education is going to stop now. You know what I mean?
So I won't name the district, but as you were telling that story, I was thinking about a specific district because we were able to jump right back in. And this is a fairly large district. The district was struggling getting their kids online. They could not figure out how to do it. And toward the end of March, the superintendent reached out to me and said, can I please see what you all are doing?
Right.
And so I had a Zoom meeting with the superintendent of this district, and I'm not exaggerating. On the call, he said, we can't possibly do this. We're just going to have to quit. And the entire month of April and the entire month of May, they did nothing.
Wow.
Didn't communicate anything. You want to talk about outrage management? No one had a clue what was going on. Their employees didn't know what was happening.
Terrible.
Finally, right before school was supposed to get out for the summer, mid-May, they sent out an email to all the districts saying, sorry, we couldn't figure this out. We're going to work on it all summer and we'll be ready in the fall.
Wow.
And that was how they handled the entire process.
That's crazy. Crazy.
Yeah. So
they did not call us.
I have a feeling that's where outrage management came from.
Yeah, they did not call us. We got a lot of schools calling us but I can tell you, we did not have one that did not go to school for 2 months, because
didn't tell anyone anything.
Yeah. I mean, you got to communicate. I mean, let me ask you this. Is that superintendent still the superintendent?
Nope.
There's a shocker.
But honestly, the school board, that individual did not lose their job. They quit. But the school board was just as at fault because they weren't communicating either.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the school board and the administration typically hire us together. They're together on these because they want the same thing for the kids.
And this was a pretty large district. I'm talking over 100,000 kids.
That's really disappointing. to be honest. Hopefully, now they have their ducks in a row and that won't ever happen again in that
I
district.
hope.
But now that, and I think, employees have seen this, now that people have gone online for so many things, including work, they find that you can do it now. So like if a building has to be shut down for a couple of days to work on heater system, not even just schools, but like city hall or whatever, city workers can go home and do their work from home. Whereas before it was like, oh my gosh, city government's going to close for a couple of days. I mean, truly, we would close if we had to close city hall, just for a couple of days till we could get back and running. Nowadays, that's not even thought of. So if there's anything that came out of the pandemic is that we are really flexible as a human race on where we can work and where we can study. And, we have those systems in place now, which is very beneficial.
So when I'm going to put you on the spot before we get to final thoughts, but when's the last time you've been sitting around watching TV or scrolling your phone or your tablet and just out loud, you say, what an idiot. How stupid can they be? What you've seen something that somebody's done from a crisis management standpoint, and you just shake your head. You just let it out. You can't hold back. Has there been a time recently that you can think of?
10 minutes, every 10 minutes. I mean, do you read the news? Do you read the paper?
I was about to say, turn the television on.
I mean, I don't even watch TV. I don't watch news on TV, to be honest. I read the paper. I read, people get their news on social media. I'm not immune to that. I get my news on social media. A lot of times I'll see links, I'll go to it, but I do read the paper. I read certain papers. We have clients in different cities around the country. I read their papers, and every day I'm reading something, and I'm like, literally every 10 minutes, there's something that somebody said or did, and I'm like, what were they thinking? And I can't even name names because a lot of them are clients. They say something and then I'm like, what were they thinking?
Oh, we want you to name names. No, we're not that kind of podcast. No. We're not controversial, but
she's an attorney. You're not getting her to do that.
Everybody finds themselves in these situations. It's not just our clients, and we're a human race. We make mistakes. We mess up. We say things we don't mean. We say inappropriate things, and we don't mean it the way it comes out sometimes. And sometimes we do mean it that way and we don't realize it's a bad thing. I mean, we're just fallible people. We're a human race. The point is you gotta own it, face it, talk about it, apologize, be very forthright. People are very forgiving when you are.
Unless you're dealing with sports teams. If it's sports teams, maybe people aren't as forgiving about that when sports teams mess up. And Ruston's down in the SEC, and I know, Stephanie, you're a big sports fan as well.
I am.
But
I'm a big soccer fan.
Yeah, we're pretty tribalistic about that. But
we make reactionary decisions, then think later.
I guess it's always okay if it's our team that does it. But if it's our rival team, they're the worst people in the world. Then if they do something wrong.
Absolutely.
But let's finish this up with some parting thoughts. We'll go, Ruston. You can throw out some of your parting thoughts, and then we'll finish up with you, Stephanie, of a takeaway, one or two takeaways that you'd like our audience to go away with.
Okay.
So I've led some pretty large organizations. I had one organization that had 230 employees. And I used to think that crisis management and different areas like that were things that we could just handle. I didn't need outside help for that. We could figure it out as we go. And it wasn't until I was running one organization and I had a parent who did crisis management for a living. And she offered her services pro bono because her kids were in the school.
Nice.
And we sat down with her, and it wasn't until we started listening to all the different areas that she was processing that we realized, okay, we can't possibly do this on our own. We just don't think about all the different things that she's thinking about. And so I think my takeaway would be, if you're listening and you run an organization or you're an executive in an organization, please be honest with yourself enough to go, I can't possibly think about all the potential ways this could go south. And I need to bring in somebody to help think those things through and make sure we're covered for absolutely anything. And I used to tell people all the time, because my board would kind of question the cost of crisis management people. And I would say, hey, we paid for insurance on our buildings, right?
That's right.
You know, our revenue matters. And if something happens that causes our revenue to go south, you're going to fire me and you're going to be really angry. So I'm proactively making sure that our revenue is taken care of, and that just like we bought insurance on our building, we're buying insurance on our revenue. So I think that's, if nothing else, I hope anybody listening today heard you talk about a lot of different variables and said, I wouldn't have thought of that.
I think it's funny that you say insurance, because you must have heard one of my presentations before, because I say we insure, the buildings we live in and work in, the desks we work on, the computers we work on, the cars we drive, even the people with health insurance. We give them health insurance, but you can't insure against a reputational attack, which is why it's so important. Got something flying around. It's so important, to know just the basics. If you've learned nothing else from today, silence is not golden when dealing with a crisis. You need to tell the truth, tell it all, tell it first, tell it fast, and tell it to the people who matter most. That's what you need to know. That's my biggest takeaway.
Well, Stephanie York, we appreciate it. She's with Hennes Communication. You can check them out at crisiscommunication.com. That's crisiscommunication.com. Stephanie, thank you so much for your insights. And for everybody watching this on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Rumble, maybe you're listening to this on the Success is a Choice podcast network. If you would kindly smash that like button or that little notification bell or the thumbs up or whatever, share this with somebody, because crisis management, crisis communication is a big deal. And we see this, as Stephanie said, all the time on TV. So this is not something that's just an isolated thing. Everybody needs this. So share this with somebody, whether they're a coach, an administrator, a business person, it doesn't matter. Share this show with them somehow. But we thank all of you for checking out the show today. And until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?